The family of Malcolm X is filing a wrongful death lawsuit 58 years after he was assassinated. It alleges the New York Police Department and multiple government agencies concealed evidence in his murder. The suit, led by attorney Ben Crump, is asking for $100 million. Malcolm X was 39 at the time, giving a speech in New York City when he was shot a total of 21 times in front of his wife and daughters. One of his daughters spoke Tuesday discussing the new litigation.
The truth about the circumstances leading to the death of our father is important not only to his family, but to many followers, many admirers, many who look to him for guidance, for love.
Peniel Joseph joins me now. He's a professor at the University of Texas at Austin and the Barbara Jordan Chair in Ethics and Political Values at the university's LBJ School of Public Affairs. He's also written extensively about Malcolm X and the Black Power movement. Professor, can you take us back and set the stage on the day of Malcolm X's murder, both in terms of his place in the Nation of Islam, but also his role in the larger fight for civil rights in America?
Well, by February 21st, 1965, John, Malcolm X really is serving as Black America's unofficial prime minister. He's left the Nation of Islam by the end of December 1963. He makes that official on March 9th, 1964, and he immediately travels to the Middle East and North Africa and becomes an Orthodox Muslim. He takes the Hajj pilgrimage, and then he goes again to Cairo by July 13th and stays in Africa up until November 21st. And he goes to the Organization of African Unity. He petitions on behalf of Black Americans with African leaders and diplomats. He meets with Kwame Nkrumah of Ghana, Nnamdi Azikiwe of Nigeria. He meets with Julius Nyerere in Tanzania and many, many other leaders. So he's really accepted in Africa as an official representative of Black Americans. And he's really launched a human rights movement. By 1964, Malcolm is saying that white Americans can be part of that human rights movement if they're sincere. And he speaks in Oxford University. He speaks all over the world, trying to bring about this idea of Black dignity and citizenship to the world over. Within the United States, he has enemies, and those enemies include those who are formerly friends in the Nation of Islam, but unfortunately, they also include the U.S. government and the FBI and the New York Police Department's Bureau of Special Services Investigation Unit, the BOSI unit, that really had been investigating Malcolm since the 1950s. And we have those declassified documents, both by the BOSI unit, the FBI, and at times the CIA and the State Department. So by February 21st, 1965, he's really a civil rights leader, a Black Power leader, a human rights leader who's trying to forge a coalition with civil rights leaders, a coalition between Black and people of color, but also that includes, again, sincere whites, to try to remove both structural racism in the United States, but also the vestiges of colonialism in Africa and the Third World. So he really becomes this really remarkable figure by the time of his assassination. And in many ways, people like Martin Luther King Jr. And him were moving closer together as the 60s progressed than they had been a decade before.
And so with that history, and you mentioned the New York Police Department, various other federal agencies were following and watching Malcolm X. What do you make of this suit, and how does that coincide with the three men who were convicted of his murder?
Well, I think the suit is long past time. We've known that the men who were convicted of Malcolm's murder, even before the exoneration of Muhammad Aziz, Khalil Islam, in 2021, they were exonerated, and they had spent time for being convicted of killing Malcolm. So we know that there has been a cover-up. We know that there were FBI informants, there were members of the New York Police Department who were there at the Audubon, who had been spying on Malcolm, and folks who knew that violence was coming. Now we know the violence came from the Newark mosque. And so what's extraordinary about the assassination of Malcolm X is not really what we don't know. It's that we've known for a long time, and it's taken decades. This is the 58th anniversary of Malcolm's death for a measure of justice to come. But I think the family still wants and deserves more justice. And I think that that justice will be coming.
Well, explain that. How do you, Crump mentioned deposing witnesses. Do you think that, that justice can come in the form of a lawsuit, and how do you think that plays out?
Well, I think it plays out with those who are still living. There was a great 6-part Netflix documentary that really investigated this a couple of years ago and looked at the way in which the shooter is now deceased, but there are still people who are alive who were there and who are connected to law enforcement and connected to government agencies and who can serve as witnesses. So I do think that this layer can be unraveled. And what's interesting is that Malcolm's death has been a kind of cold case when we think about the civil rights era. We think about Emmett Till, we think about all these other cases, but Malcolm's death has been a cold case because the people really charged with the murder didn't do it. And then the people who did the murder got away with it. And so in a lot of ways, the family is seeking justice because of government collusion, right? So, and this includes the New York City District Attorney's Office, right? This includes the New York Police Department. But again, unfortunately, it includes the FBI, the CIA, the State Department, because as somebody who's researched on Malcolm, I've reviewed personally tens of thousands of pages of documents on Malcolm X that were illegally recorded, that have now, through the Freedom of Information Act, been given to researchers, but there are tens of thousands of other pages that have not been released, right? So we actually still have more to understand, and I think the family's lawsuit is really important because Malcolm's death at the age of 39, he was the father of 4. He becomes a father of 6 posthumously because his twins are born after his assassination, is really an American tragedy because, like I said, Malcolm, like all of us, had his flaws, but by the last year of his life, he is a human rights activist who is trying to lead a coalition which is going to include Muslims, Christians, Jews, Black, white, people of color all over the world for a movement of human dignity for all people.
All right, Peniel Joseph, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.